I'm your host, Mr. Beats, and this is Strange Tales in American History, Episode 3. Shall I begin with singing? Let's do it. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. In the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave? Oh, the land of the free and the home of the brave. Sorry about that. I just wanted to sing the song that you're probably familiar with. It is the Star-Spangled Banner, the national anthem of the United States. And today we're going to get into the history of that song, a song that is extremely important to nearly every American. It is the best way to kind of show your patriotism in an easy way by singing that song. Although that song is really difficult to sing. That was really hard for me to sing. And I only sang the first stanza. It has 3 more. But, other than, the Pledge of Allegiance or maybe just putting out your American flag in front of your house, it's a very simple way to show patriotism. And the song is now 206 years old. We're going to get into the history of it. Here's one thing to start off, though. Did you know it was sung in the melody of a British song that glorified drinking alcohol and being promiscuous? That's true. Yeah, but before we get into that, let's go back to the War of 1812. The War of 1812, I like to call it the Second American War of Independence because it really was just a short time after the American Revolution. The United States was still a young country, and a generation later, after the Revolution, they found themselves fighting the British again, and this time, it's looking really bad. The War of 1812 did not start off very well for the United States. We didn't have much of a military at that time. We were still a pretty weak nation. The British were just kicking our butts. The British were still the best navy in the world. They were distracted by other wars around the world, but still were kicking our butts, okay? They went to Washington, D.C., and just destroyed the town, everything they could. The burning of Washington, as it's known, August 24th, 1814, the British had defeated the Americans at the Battle of Bladensburg, and then General Robert Ross, who particularly hated Americans, led this charge of the Capitol. It included the burning of the White House, which back then was called the Presidential Mansion, the Capitol Building, President James Madison, other military officials, and the entire government flees the city after the British take it over. It was a retaliation for recent American destruction of Port Dover in Upper Canada, but still, this was a huge setback for the United States, symbolically showing that, this war is not going well. What are we going to do? And a crazy thing about the burning of Washington is just a day after the attack of the city began, a hurricane quite possibly just swept through Washington, D.C. and put out much of the fires. And there was also a tornado, apparently, that passed through the center of the Capitol. Crazy, crazy times. And so the occupation of Washington, D.C. only lasted about 26 hours, but still, the British, again, were dominating. So now, in September, we're looking at Fort McHenry in the Baltimore Harbor, Maryland, and the British are threatening to attack again. There's a bombardment, and it's known as the Battle of Baltimore. It came only weeks after the burning of Washington. The Battle of Baltimore officially lasted September 12th to the 14th, 1814. It was a land and sea battle. On one side for the British, you had Vice Admiral Alexander Cochrane, Rear Admiral George Cockburn, and Major General Robert Ross, who I mentioned before. They sail up the Chesapeake Bay. They strike the port. Baltimore at the time was the third largest city in the country, so if it went down, it would be another big deal. On the other side, the Americans, they have Major George Armistead. A lot of ordinary citizens are defending the city of Baltimore with makeshift earthworks. So 4,700 British troops land, opposing them 3,200 militia, but it would ultimately be an American victory after a 25-hour bombardment. Just before the Battle of Baltimore happens, a guy named Francis Scott Key and his friend John Stuart Skinner set sail from Baltimore on board the ship the HMS Minden, and their goal is to fly a flag of truce on a mission approved by the president, President Madison. Their mission was to secure an exchange of prisoners. One of them was William Beans, who was a very popular doctor in Upper Marlborough and a friend of Key's, who had been captured in his home by the British. Beans was accused of aiding the arrest of British soldiers, so that's why they kidnapped him. So Key and Skinner get on board the HMS Tonnant on September 7th, 1814. They speak with the aforementioned Robert Ross and the aforementioned Alexander Cochrane over dinner while the two officers discussed war plans. At first, the two officers refused to release Beans, but Key and Skinner showed them letters by wounded British prisoners praising Beans and appreciating his kind treatment, so they changed their minds. Regardless, though, after this is over, Key and Skinner had heard details from the officers of the plans for the attack on Baltimore, so the British held them on the ship until after the battle. So they first were on the HMS Surprise, and then later back on the HMS Minden. So they sat there on the ship watching the British just like cannon after cannon bombing Fort McHenry. They're kind of feeling helpless. There's nothing they can do, and they're watching their beloved country just get destroyed. Key later wrote, quote, "It seemed as though Mother Earth had opened and was vomiting shot and shell in a sheet of fire and brimstone." But, at the same time, admiring how the Americans are defending themselves as this barrage hits Fort McHenry. The Americans were able to defend the fort. At night, Key saw only red erupting in the night sky. He could have swore the British were going to win. But in the clearing smoke of the dawn, the next morning on September 14th, the dawn's early lights, he saw the American flag, not the British Union Jack, the American flag still flying over the fort, showing that the Americans won. This was a very life-changing experience, obviously, for Key, and he put his thoughts on paper while he was still on board the ship, and he wrote a poem. Key wrote his poem actually to fit the beat and the melody of a popular English song called To Anacreon in Heaven, which was written by English composer John Stafford Smith. It was the official song of the Anacreonic Society, an 18th century gentleman's club of musicians in London. The words of the song To Anacreon in Heaven originally were all about drinking and being promiscuous. Regardless, he liked the melody. Key's brother-in-law, a commander of a militia at Fort McHenry, read Key's work and loved it, and he distributed it under the name Defense of Fort McHenry. On September 20th, the newspapers, Baltimore Patriot and The American, both printed the song with the note, tune, Anacreon in Heaven. The song quickly became popular, with 17 newspapers from Georgia to New Hampshire printing it, and it was a bit of a viral sensation, especially because of the rising patriotism of the time. Americans were very proud anyway of the defense of Fort McHenry, so this poem and song, of course, just was a great way to show that pride. So it became more and more popular. Its first public performance took place in October when Baltimore actor Ferdinand Durang sang it at a tavern. Washington Irving, who was then the editor of the Analectic magazine in Philadelphia, reprinted the song in November. So for the rest of the 1800s, there were various versions of the song in popular use. Some parts of the country would just sing one stanza. Others would sing all 4 stanzas. It was a hit song, you know. It would be popular in certain regions more than others. Obviously, Baltimore, it was always popular. But then other parts of the country maybe didn't know about it much at all. But now we're going to go to South Dakota. And apparently there's this plaque that's displayed at Fort Meade in South Dakota that claims the idea of making the Star-Spangled Banner the national anthem began right there at their parade ground in 1892. The story goes that Colonel Caleb Carleton, who was a commander there, he established the tradition that the song be played, quote, at retreat and at the close of parades and concerts. And he got the governor to establish it as official tradition for the militia. Later, Secretary of War Daniel S. Lamont issued an order that it, quote, be played at every army post every evening at retreat. In 1899, the U.S. Navy officially adopts the Star-Spangled Banner, and then it wasn't until 1916 that the federal government starts to look into, like, maybe we should turn this song into something more official. You had President Woodrow Wilson at the time. He first orders that the Star-Spangled Banner be played at military and other appropriate occasions. He put the U.S. Bureau of Education with the task of providing the official version of the song, since there were so many different versions circulating. In response, the Bureau enlisted the help of 5 different musicians to agree upon one arrangement. Those musicians were Walter Domrosch, Will Earhart, Arnold Gantfort, Oscar Sonic, and somebody you may have heard of, John Philip Sousa. So those 5 got together at Carnegie Hall on December 5th, 1917, and they all came up with a standardized version, which is the version that you know today, the version that I sang at the beginning of this episode. They put on a concert to celebrate this unleashing of this official version, and today you still see a handwritten version of the final votes of these 5 men before this official unveiling of the song. Of course, this is a new era of a rise in patriotism. The United States had been at war for a few months at this point, World War I. So, what about sports? Today we know that nearly every major sporting event begins in the United States with the Star-Spangled Banner. Well, sports kind of led the charge as well, and it started mostly with baseball. In Game 1 of the 1918 World Series, and thereafter, after every game of the series, is when the anthem first was played before a major baseball game. So Game 1 of the 1918 World Series was between the Boston Red Sox and the Chicago Cubs. People were kind of upset and somber. You know, the war is going on. During the 7th inning stretch, however, the band lifted everyone's spirits with a very dramatic and powerful performance of the Star-Spangled Banner. The New York Times actually described it as, quote, as the crowd of 10,274 spectators, the smallest that has witnessed the Diamond Classic in many years, stood up to take their afternoon yawn. That has been the privilege and custom of baseball fans for many generations. The band broke forth to the strains of the Star-Spangled Banner. The yawn was checked and heads were bared as the ball players turned quickly about and faced the music. Jackie Fred Thomas of the U.S. Navy was at attention as he stood erect with his eyes set on the flag fluttering at the top of the lofty pole in right field. First, the song was taken up by a few, then others joined, and when the final notes came, a great volume of melody rolled across the field. It was at the very end that the onlookers exploded into thunderous applause and rent the air with a cheer that marked the highest point of the day's enthusiasm. Although there is evidence, the earliest documented performance of the Star-Spangled Banner at a baseball game, it took place at the Union Baseball and Cricket Grounds in Brooklyn, New York on May 15th, 1862. It was the park's opening game, and then they just played it every opening game after that at the start of the season. Now, that's 1862. Remember, baseball was invented in 1839, so you can really thank baseball a lot for helping to popularize the Star-Spangled Banner. The tradition of performing the national anthem before every baseball game didn't begin until World War II. However, still, throughout all this time, the song is not yet recognized as the official national anthem by Congress. That begins to change on April 10th, 1918. John Charles Linthicum, a congressman from Maryland, introduces a bill to officially recognize the Star-Spangled Banner as the national anthem. It's important to point out that Linthicum was motivated to create this bill by his wife Helen and another woman, Mrs. Reuben Ross Holloway. They both talked him into it. However, the bill did not pass, and so it just sits there and gets forgotten throughout the 1920s. But then jump again to April 15th, 1929, and again, Linthicum introduces the bill. By this time, this is the 6th time that he's tried to introduce it. And then, later that year, on November 3rd, Robert Ripley of Ripley's Believe It or Not fame made a cartoon saying, quote, "Believe it or not, America has no national anthem." This caught the attention of many folks, and so Linthicum's idea starts to gain traction. In 1930, you got the Veterans of Foreign Wars starting a petition for the United States to officially recognize the Star-Spangled Banner as the national anthem. 5 million people signed this petition, and it's presented to the United States House Committee on the Judiciary on January 31st, 1930. That same day, Elsie Doris Riley and Grace Evelyn Bolden sang the song to the committee to refute the perception that it was too high-pitched for a typical person to sing. You know, you can sing it at different pitches, you know. The committee voted in favor of sending the bill to the House floor for a vote. The House of Representatives passed the bill, and on March 3rd, 1931, the Senate passes the bill. President Herbert Hoover signs the bill into law on March 4th, 1931. So yeah, it was less than 100 years ago that the Star-Spangled Banner officially became the national anthem of the United States. It took a while. As currently codified under United States Code, quote, "The composition consisting of the words and music known as the Star-Spangled Banner is the national anthem." So yeah, although the Star-Spangled Banner officially has 4 stanzas from the original poem that Francis Scott Key wrote, only the first stanza is generally sung, and that's the part that I sang. But yeah, that's only a fourth of the song. So since 1931, the popularity of the song has only grown. In fact, I would say just in the last couple decades, the popularity has skyrocketed, as you've seen since 9/11 especially. And now, you even see the Star-Spangled Banner performed before bowling league openings and horseshoe tournaments and just random stuff that you never would expect to see it before, even 10 years ago. So it's an important part of American culture. However, it's also been something over the years that certain people have seen as an opportunity to show protest against something. For example, the 1968 Olympics, you saw the Black Power salute, although it's debatable whether it was actually the Black Power salute. But it was a political demonstration conducted by African-American athletes Tommy Smith and John Carlos during their medal ceremony at the 1968 Summer Olympics. This was in Mexico City. They both got gold and bronze, respectively, in the 200-meter running event. And while the Star-Spangled Banner played, each athlete raised a black-gloved fist, and they kept them raised until the anthem had finished. Smith later said that this was not a Black Power salute, but just a, quote, human rights salute. Regardless, this event is one of the most memorable political statements in all of Olympic history. And then, jumping a few decades to 2016, a lot of people already know about this, but there were the protests that began with Colin Kaepernick, a quarterback formerly of the San Francisco 49ers, who knelt during the anthem as opposed to the tradition of standing. And later he said that it was in response to police brutality in the United States. He sat during the first 2 preseason games, but it went unnoticed. And so he knelt to get more people's attention, and he thought it was still a way to kind of show respect to the flag while still addressing what he wanted to address. Still, a lot of people got mad at Kaepernick, and it was a controversial thing. It did lead to other players doing the same thing later on throughout the NFL. And then more recently, this is something that most people probably don't know about. In November 2017, the California chapter of the NAACP called on Congress to remove the Star-Spangled Banner as a national anthem. And they basically said that Francis Scott Key was a racist, and the poem itself, specifically the third stanza, which most people don't know the words of, is interpreted as racist. Some of the most memorable performances in history have been the Star-Spangled Banner before sporting events. Generally, I think a lot of people credit Whitney Houston for having among the best performances of the anthem ever before Super Bowl 25. Probably one of the worst performances would be Roseanne Barr before the July 26, 1990 Padres game, where she grabs her crotch. A lot of people criticized her for that. But after the United States government recognized the Star-Spangled Banner as the national anthem in 1931, they didn't really have a prescription as far as proper behavior during its playing. It wasn't until July 22nd, 1942 that the law was revised to say those in uniform should salute during its playing and others should simply stand at attention, men removing their hats. That same code also required women should place their hands over their hearts when the flag is displayed during the playing of the national anthem, but not if the flag was not present. On December 23, 1942, again the law was revised, and it showed that men and women had to stand at attention to face the direction of the music when it was played, and those in uniform were required to salute. On July 7, 1976, the law was simplified. Men and women were told to just stand with their hands over their hearts, men removing their hats, irrespective of whether or not the flag was displayed, and those in uniform saluting. In 1998, the law was rewritten, keeping the same instructions, but differentiating between, quote, those in uniform and, quote, members of the armed forces and veterans. Because of all these changes in the law over the years, there has been a lot of confusion. And then people get mixed up between, what do we do with the Pledge of Allegiance versus the national anthem? A lot of people just stand at attention and are silent with their hands folded during the national anthem. It wasn't really until after 9/11 that the custom of placing the hand over the heart during the Star-Spangled Banner became much more common. But again, these are just customs. I mean, people that are members of Jehovah's Witnesses, for example, do not sing the national anthem because it goes against their religion. And you can't be punished for not doing these things when the national anthem is playing. I mean, we're not a fascist country. But regardless, you do see overwhelmingly people comply with this out of respect for the flag and the country. And so it is quite amazing to see tens of thousands of people in a stadium all completely silent at once, even the little kids, during the performance of the song. It makes for very dramatic moments, and I get why people get emotional during it. And it all started with a song written by a guy trapped on a ship watching a battle that seemed to be in the favor of the British. He wrote the poem down to the tune of a song that also happened to be a British drinking song. Francis Scott Key, his legacy will live on. So today, over 2 centuries later, that flag that inspired Francis Scott Key to write the poem that became the Star-Spangled Banner survives. Though it's barely together, it's very fragile and it's falling apart. But to preserve it, the National Museum of American History raised money from Polo Ralph Lauren, the Pew Charitable Trust, and the U.S. Congress itself, and it's now displayed as the centerpiece in the National Museum of American History. That's the Smithsonian one in Washington, D.C. The Star-Spangled Banner continues to remain a symbol of American history that is right up there with the Statue of Liberty and the Declaration of Independence. It is something that I don't think will ever change. So many Americans love it. There has been, a little bit of lighthearted talk about, well, let's get another song to be the national anthem. I mean, what would the new national anthem be? What are the candidates? We got America the Beautiful. We've got Party in the USA. I don't know. They just don't have that same, passion. I just don't see that happening anytime soon. It's such a beloved song and it does really capture so much about the American spirit. So there you have it. There was the history of the Star-Spangled Banner. Now you know. Since this is the third episode, and if you've enjoyed these so far, first of all, thank you for listening. But second, if you have any suggestions for future topics, I mean, I'm just taking some of my favorite stories from American history, stories that I am already familiar with, but I would like to dig in deeper and research new stuff. So I'm always open to suggestions. Let us know in the comments, or if you want to email me at IamMrBeat@gmail. You can also find me on Instagram at IamMrBeat, also Twitter at BeatmasterMatt, and finally my YouTube channel. Just search Mr. Beat, and I will appreciate those suggestions. Thanks for listening. Until next time, this has been Strange Tales in American History.